Hey guys, hope you're all doing okay. Welcome back to the channel. Today I want to do something a little bit different. I want to sort of bring, for my first science video, link a scientific concept to a real life occurrence. So as you can see here, the fight between KSI and Logan Paul. And what I want to focus on are the fight itself, you know, these impacts that have been made between KSI and Logan Paul, and specifically focus on, you know, sort of what's happening inside their heads during these impacts from their 10-ounce gloves.
It's going to be interesting to see if JJ can keep that.
That's a good uppercut.
Good uppercut from Logan Paul. Down goes KSI, but now Jack Reese says no. Hang on about this. Did he hit him on the floor?
Like a punch when it's down.
Wait a minute. We have drama in this fight.
So this one, for example, is a well-known part of the fight where Logan Paul lost a couple of points. But you see where there's a lot of sort of impact going to his brain. So traumatic brain injury, or TBI. So to break it down for you, the different types of TBI injury. So you've got closed head injury, open/penetrating injury, or crush injury. So closed head injury involves a trauma or injury that basically involves the brain to be violently shaken inside of the skull. Examples being blast injuries or impacts. But the defining factor really is that there's no visible wound, there's no sort of penetration of any objects into the brain or through the skull. And when it comes to closed head injuries, they can come in a number of forms. So rotational forces, this sort of shearing or twisting of the head, and hence the brain within the skull. The coup or blow, which involves an impact normally from the back of the head, which will sort of push the brain into the front of the skull, or the opposite being contre-coup or counter blow, which is where the brain is pushed into the back of the skull. And the contre-coup or coup can cause confusion, swelling, as well as blood clots. So linking back to the fight, that's a potential contre-coup, followed by another, and then two coup impacts to the back of KSI's head. So obviously that's not me saying that either of these guys, KSI or Logan Paul, will suffer from the permanent impairment or loss of this cognitive, physical and psychosocial function, as the definition earlier said. But it is suggested that long-term exposure to impacts such as what you receive from boxing may increase the risk of damage and impairment to the brain through, you know, the shearing and the twisting of these brain cells, as well as sort of the risk of blood clots. So the second type of traumatic brain injury is the open or penetrating injury. And unlike the closed head injury, this involves an object actually going through the skull and entering the brain. This can either be quite minor, or in the case of a man called Phineas Gage, really quite extreme. So on the 13th of September in 1848, Phineas Gage was working as a foreman of a crew which was repairing a railway bed near a place called Cavendish in Vermont. So what they were doing is they were packing explosive powder into a hole, of which Phineas Gage was using a tamping rod, an iron tamping rod, to basically pack this powder into the ground. The powder ended up detonating or exploding, which sent this rod, which was 43 inches long and had a diameter of 1¼ inches, shooting straight upwards. Wouldn't have been an issue, but unfortunately it entered Gage's left cheek and ended up tearing through his brain before it exited his skull and landed 80 feet away. What was astonishing was that Phineas Gage actually survived this and was not only fully conscious, but was standing and able to be loaded at the back of an ox cart, despite the fact that he had two very large holes in his head and substantial bleeding. So he was taken to a man called Dr. John Harlow, who did his best to piece the remaining portions of his skull back together. And despite losing sight in his left eye, Gage made a full recovery in just a couple of months. Despite physically healing, Gage was described by his friends as no longer being Gage. He never lost his ability to speak or hold his memories or the ability to move, but he became in himself very rude, impatient, stubborn, and dismissive of others' opinions. Several years later, he suffered epileptic seizures, which went on for several months, before then suffering from a series of major convulsions, which ultimately led to his death on May the 21st, 1860. The injury he sustained from that tamping pot was suggested to be localized to the frontal lobe of the brain, and so this gives early evidence that aspects of someone's personality and behaviour are controlled by portions of the frontal lobe. Neurologist Antonio Damasio spent years studying injuries similar to Gage's, and this research has led to the belief that emotion is very closely linked to rational thought and decision making. So the third type of traumatic brain injury is crush injury, which is the least common type but occurs when the head is sandwiched between two hard objects. This usually not only causes the skull to be damaged but also the brain cells of the brain stem during this type of injury. So lastly, I wanted to cover what happens when it comes to being admitted to a hospital with a TBI or traumatic brain injury, and how the doctors go about determining how severe your head injury is. So a method they use commonly is called the Glasgow Coma Scale, and this is broken up into 3 categories. So you have eye opening. A high score of 4 is given if a patient can open their eyes spontaneously, whereas the other end of the spectrum, a 1 is given if a patient does not open their eyes in response to any stimulus. The second category is the verbal response. A score of 5 is given to a patient if they are oriented and can speak coherently, and a score of 1 is given if a patient gives no verbal response whatsoever. And finally, the motor response, a score of 6 is given if the patient can move their arms and legs in response to a verbal command, and the low score of 1 is given if there's no movement in response to any stimuli whatsoever. So after you've had this assessment, if you end up with a score between 3 and 8, this indicates you've got a severe head injury. A score that falls within the boundaries of 9 to 12 indicates more of a moderate head injury, whilst 13 to 15 indicates a very mild head injury. And the score you receive can give an idea as to not only the extent of the injury, but the time it would take for you to recover. So, as a slight side note, I've had a bit of feedback recently regarding the mixing of gameplay into my channel along with the science content, suggesting that maybe I should keep it focused on the science. So let me know what you think in the comments, whether you enjoy the gameplay of the monthly PlayStation Plus games or would rather just see science content. So just wanted to quickly thank bensound.com for providing the royalty-free music for this video. It's great for if you're starting out as a YouTube channel like me. Just make sure that you credit the website, link is down in the description if you need it. But other than that, thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you next time.